So usually we begin with a legend. This is sort of a combination legend history. Okay? Ikawakahiko, Mamualoa o Kapenakuke. Once upon a time, long before Captain Cook, there were people who came to these islands. They came to these islands. Today we would call them Polynesians. They didn't use that term. They came to these islands at different times, from different places, with different traditions. And when they got here, they formed a culture, and that culture went through changes, of course, like things do. But eventually what happened was they established a kind of a government that we would call feudal, because it was very similar in many ways to the feudal system in Europe. Okay? And the land was ruled by an aristocracy. And it became very important for someone to be part of that aristocracy because they had all kinds of privileges over the commoners. And it became very important to establish one's rank and position. Now, the islands are fairly, not a great distance apart, but it's not like everybody knew everybody. So if the term that was used was called Ali'i, usually translated as chief, but it really means a member of the aristocracy. So if a chief was traveling from one island to another and wanted to claim his rights as a member of the aristocracy, why, he had to recite, or have recited for him, a genealogy. Now, a genealogy is a line of descent from a recognized ancestor. Okay? And that makes the difference. We find this in lots of places of the world where especially the ruling class has to establish its right to rule through some kind of genealogy. And interestingly, even in Europe, in the early parts of the feudal system, they had to establish a genealogy leading back to a god of some kind. Well, it was the same kind of thing here. The best kind of genealogy led to a god, of course. Right? Well, if you were just an ordinary chief, which means, kind of lower in rank, and let's say there were higher chiefs and lower chiefs. Well, if you were in the lower chief, it would be okay for you to go someplace, whenever your status was in question, you would recite your own genealogy. So even the chiefs had to have a certain amount of memory training, at least for that, right? And other reasons sometimes. But if you were a high-ranking chief, you had to bring your own genealogist with you. And this genealogist, on your behalf, would then recite your genealogy all the way back to whoever it was that your family line said they came from. Right? This person had a poetic kind of name. In fact, the genealogists could actually be called the poets of old Hawaii, the ballad poets, because, as Susan had mentioned earlier, the genealogy would often contain stories and events to help place and remember all the different people who were involved. So this person was called on Ipuwai Au Au. Now, on the surface, it's kind of a silly name because it means a water gourd carrying bathwater. Yeah, okay. What's that mean? Well, the concept of a gourd, which is a container holding water, referred to the memory. Au au is a word that means to bathe. So that concept was the role of the genealogist was not only to carry the memory, but to keep it clean, which means accurate. And it's been said in some places that if a genealogist, this is supposed to be somebody trained and supposed to know what to do already, if they missed a word or misspelled a word, it was said that they would be put to death. Because that would call into question the validity of the genealogy of the chief. And you couldn't have that. Right? So this was, part of the system that they had. In modern times, when Western genealogists try to look at the old chants, why they try to use a Western system that somebody made up and apply it to the Hawaiian to figure out how old the line is. Doesn't work. The standard way of doing this is to say 25 years per generation. So that if you have 25 names in a genealogy, that means 25 generations back. The problem with that is Hawaiians did not record history and years and dates. That was of no interest. What was necessary was that the genealogy point toward the right ancestors. Okay? And it wasn't thought of in terms of past like we think of it. It was something that existed now. This is the relationship that exists. Uh-huh. And so it was much more important to have that relationship proper. Now, I said at the beginning that there were people who came from different times and places. And of course, they had different genealogies. So there's a number of different genealogies that we can find in Hawaiian culture. One of them is called Kumuhonua. And that's taken from a character, one of the main people in the genealogy. And this is the one that's very much in favor on Molokai. Okay, it's different from all the other islands. And in this one, there was the man, Kumuhonua, who was descended from the gods through another god called Laka, and had all kinds of adventures and peopled the islands. And in this chant, with the stories that went with it, almost everything was included. So there were the stories of Menehune. They were part of the line of descent. And the Mu people, who are supposed to be an older one, they were in line of descent. Goes all the way down to what in some of the other traditions is called an earth mother, Papa. She became one of the ancestors in this chant. And this led all the way down to the chiefs of Molokai. Sometimes some things happen where the chanters or the people who are responsible for that try and kind of beef up the genealogy. So they will incorporate other things into it. And the Kumuhonua has some events that are almost identical to the creation story in the Christian Bible. Okay? I mean, there was a garden and the wife did something and they got kicked out, and it just follows that. So that became part of that genealogical chant. Now there was a different one called Opuka Honua. In this case, you hear the Honua more than once. Honua is a word that means earth. But when it's used poetically like this, it refers to race or lineage. Okay? So Opuka Honua was, again, the main person in the chant was Opuka Honua. That was his name. Only in this chant, he came to the islands when there were already people settled here. And so his chant then goes on and on and on. And remember I mentioned Papa, the Earth Mother. So in one of the other traditions, which is not an Ali'i tradition, but one of the other traditions is that Papa was the Earth Mother and Wakea was we might call it Sky Father, and they mated and gave birth to creation. But in these chants, they're simply ancestors within the genealogy. So the Opuka Honua chant all the way comes down to Wakea as one of the ancestors. That's a nice godly ancestor to have in your lineage. And this one is the chant that leads down to the Kamehameha family. Okay. And that, of course, was on Oahu and on Maui. There was another chant, I'm just doing some of the main ones, another chant that was different from either one of these. And this was I believe it was the Ku'ili, if I remember correctly, would be the name of the chant. Now this one was different because it had a different set of ancestors. It was favored on Kauai and Big Island, and I think Maui too. So this was a different chant, and the difference was that it followed a whole line of ancestors that led down to a whole other line. And then there was the Kumulipo. Now this is the one that most people are familiar with, as far as the name goes, if you know anything about Hawaiian culture. This is another genealogical chant. Now, we're very happy that I believe that was a portion of the chant. Were you doing it from the Kumulipo?
Actually,
not sure?
It's from Hawaiian personal genealogy, so I don't know.
Okay, I think it probably was because of the way that Kane and Kanaloa were involved in that. Okay? These become creator gods in this particular chant. But I'm glad she only picked a portion of it because the chant is more than 2,000 lines long, okay, and does take a while to recite. And this one includes stories about Maui, the famous character that's considered also a shaman or a trickster, somebody like that. That's all of his stuff is included in there. And many other kinds of stories in this time of darkness, which seems to be a very, very old part of the chant and could come from some events that happened thousands of years ago. But the Kumulipo is the chant line that goes down to the Kalakaua family. Okay? And this was the last king and the last queen of Hawaii. And this was their genealogical chant. So the main thing that was about this part of it is that each one of these had a different line. But the most important part was that the genealogist had to have very exceptional memory. And there was all kinds of training that was done for that. Today, we really don't know what kind of training they did, for sure. We knew some of the things that were used in the chants that Susan mentioned, but there was an awful lot of material that had to be remembered, and it had to be accurate for the purpose that it was set to. Okay? And there were other kinds of memory things that had to be done by different kinds of kahuna and others that had more magical or spiritual purposes. But the genealogist had to have this really accurate, special memory. And that has become and is still a very important part of Hawaiian culture. So, Pipiholo Keka'au, that means, and so the story goes. And now we'll get into the topic for today. And the topic for today is how to improve your memory. Well, when we're looking at this, there are lots and lots of ways. I'm going to give you some that really work well. And these have to do with not only improving it, but also maintaining it, which is a very important thing too. And we'll talk about some of the things that get in the way of that as we go along. But to begin with, it's been pretty well established that one of the ways to improve and maintain memory is to learn something new. And this means a constant learning of something new. It doesn't really matter what it is, as long as it's something you didn't know before. What happens when you're doing this, when you learn something new, it creates new connections in the brain. But not only new connections all by themselves, it's new connections that connect to other stuff that you know. I'll give you some kind of an example. And the more you know about something, the more connections you can make to other things. I'll tell you a little story. A mechanic, a master mechanic, who really knows engines very well. Okay? Why, we can be standing with that person and let's say there's something gone wrong with the car, and the mechanic will listen and he knows exactly what it is. You standing next to him would almost think like he's got a form of clairvoyance that would look into the engine and be able to see, yes, right, this rod is bent and it's not working really well. But it's all because of having so much knowledge and having all this knowledge make connections and being able to associate a particular sound with a particular problem. And this is done when there's enough interest in the subject. And I'll just do a little side thing. I went to high school with Gloria in Michigan. And one of the favorite things in a classroom in high school was to listen to the cars as they went by on the streets outside, and identifying the Chevrolet, the Cadillac, the Ford, the Dodge. You could identify them from, everybody was, that was not far from Detroit. So everybody was really, really into that kind of a thing. And we got to be able to remember and know the difference in the sound. Well, we're still talking about the mechanic. Now here's where it becomes interesting. With the mechanic, I counseled a mechanic one time, came to see me, and he was having family problems and couldn't figure out what to do. And I said, look, you're a master mechanic, right? You really know how machines work, right? He said, sure. I said, okay, think of your family like a machine. Now, if your family were a machine, what would you do? I said, I'm not a mechanic, but I know that machines need grease. What would be the equivalent of that in a family situation? And the parts need to work together in harmony. So I said, give that some thought. I didn't give him any other advice. 2 weeks later, he called me up. He said, problem solved. Because it's exactly what he did. He made new connections using his old knowledge in a totally new way to solve a family situation with what he knew about how machines work. That worked well for him. Okay? So this is what happens when you learn something new. And the beauty of it is, whether it's history or whether it's a language or whether it's looking up a word that you either can't remember or never did really know, we have wonderful resources for that today. It's not always evident as to what purpose it's going to serve or how it's going to work. And yet, doesn't matter what new knowledge you get, connections are made and situations arise in which that knowledge comes forth either in the same way or a different way and enables you to take care of something or do something that you might not have been able to do before. So anything, okay? Reading a new recipes, it doesn't matter what it is. Looking up all the new stuff that's coming out even on Facebook. I learned so many things from scrolling through my friends, watching the scroll of the Facebook stuff. They come up with the most interesting things, and sometimes links to interesting things. And it's just a constant learning process. It can be with books, it can be with newspapers, it can be with conversation, it can be with courses at the local university, or it can just be stuff that you pick up of an interest of some kind, a game. Gloria and I learned dominoes, which we had never ever played before, a couple of years ago, and we really enjoy it. We especially like the more complicated version called Mexican Train. And so we learned that. We played it for a long time, and then for Christmas, somebody gave us a cribbage board. And we had never played cribbage, discovered that it's over 400 years old. And so now we're learning all the ins and outs of cribbage. Okay? It's a lot of fun. More fun for her because she wins more often. But it's creating a new way of thinking. Okay? You had the domino set over here, but this is creating a whole new way of making connections and doing things and looking at things. It helps you look at things differently. And that can carry over into other places. So learning something new. Really, really good. Another way is expanding awareness. Now, okay, right, what does that mean? Well, it means being more aware of a bigger piece of experience than you're used to. A small example of this. It's very, very common when people go into a room or they go into a location to have a very narrow look. And this is why in all kinds of movies you see the superheroes and the heroes and even the bad guys hiding on the ceiling. Because almost nobody looks up. And yet that's part of the world there too. And there's stuff to find and stuff to see and gives you a new perspective. Just taking the time to look up and look around and look off to the side when you're in someplace new. Break the pattern of too much focus. Expanding awareness, of your senses, of your hearing, of your sight, of sound, of touch, of action, behavior. Expanding awareness opens you up. And it's that opening that helps you learn faster and learn better. Now, and remember better. Okay? So expanding awareness. Now, almost the direct opposite of that is paying attention. When you're in a situation, especially this works with names. You meet somebody, and so often the name just goes right by you. And then a moment later you can't remember it, or maybe you talk to them for a while, but the next day it just doesn't do anything. Really paying attention to something that you are interested in learning or knowing, and names are a good way to practice. Paying attention to that kind of like makes it a stronger memory. There are other ways I'll tell you about to make it even stronger than that, but one of the biggest and most important to begin with is paying attention to something. When you're studying, if that ever happens to come up, you don't just read something over and over again. That's not good enough. You got to pay attention to what you're reading. Now, I had one of my sons who was doing very poorly in high school in reading. It just wasn't interesting to him. It was boring. He had a hard time paying attention to reading. So I sat with him one time. It only took one time. I said, okay, and this was something I learned from my studies of how the monks used to illuminate books. They would have all these beautiful little paintings around the book that made it far more interesting. So I told my son, look at the page. Now I want you to make the page glow. Just imagine it's glowing. And imagine there's some beautiful decorations or interesting things all around it to make it something that is easier to look at for a longer time. Well, that's all I gave him, and his grades went up because his reading skills went up. Because now he was using his imagination to help him pay attention. And he remembered what he learned. Okay? So that's also a good technique for remembering something. You hear somebody's name, don't just hear it, listen to it, okay? And then use your imagination to make something special about that person, okay? Have a big gold pendant hanging around their neck. Give them a floppy hat. Do something like that to help set the memory that be associated with the name. The imagination is a wonderful way to help improve your memory. Okay? So now, one of the biggest things that gets in the way of remembering is tension in the body. Different people have different theories about memory. I mean, you can look wherever you like. Nobody really knows how it works. It's all speculation at this moment. In the highest scientific circles, it's still speculation. But as long as you're going to speculate, why not speculate on something that works? So we use, based on our experiences, we know that tension inhibits memory. So we do practices to relieve tension, and when we do, memory that we thought was lost comes back. And sometimes all you need is a piece of it, and if you hang on to that and just not struggle, but let it be in your mind, if you have a piece of memory, and you relax your body, the rest of it starts to come. One of the best ways, there's so many ways to relax. One of the best ways, simplest, cheapest ways to relax is with sensory focus. I would call it meditation, but some people don't like that word. It's sensory focus. Now, sensory focus means you become ultra aware of your senses in the present moment. So, for instance, sight. If you're going to do this with sight, you look around and you look at colors. It's interesting to see if you can find all the colors of the rainbow in a particular environment. You look at shapes. You look at distance. You look at spatial relationships, the space between people or the space that connects them, or things or objects. And that's on sight. Sound, you listen to sound. But you don't just, okay, there's a sound. Okay, I'm listening to the waves. If you really listen to the waves, as an example, there's all kinds of sounds within the waves, or within falling water, or in the rain, or even in music. I was listening to a program not too long ago when this guy, and did this with the imagination, he could listen to a CD of classical music, pinpoint a particular instrument, and name the point in that instrument in that CD where that was playing. And this was checked with somebody with the CD, and he was accurate all the time. He could listen to the entire orchestra, or he could pick out a single instrument and listen to it, or he had to have memories of what this instrument sounded like. But that's just a case of something that's possible to do when you really refine this stuff. So sound. There are all kinds of sounds and all kinds of sounds within sounds, right? Even in somebody's voice. And you practice that. And touch. These are the simple ones. Touch, pressure, texture, and of course temperature, and whatever other aspect of touch, you practice feeling something in the present moment. Now, doing this in the present moment brings you more into the present moment, and while you're doing it, very often you'll just spontaneously have this deep sigh, which means your body's relaxing. And one of the things that helps relaxing, if you're really focused on the sensory awareness, you're not thinking about the past, and you're not thinking about the future. And sometimes that's all we need to relax. Okay? And so the purpose of this, the reason it benefits memory is because it helps the body relax and relieve tension. Okay? So any technique that can use that does that is going to be good. Okay? And then you want to remember something, it becomes much easier to do. More on memory and connections, what really helps. Connections are the thing. Connection with people, animals, or things that you feel an affection for. Just the connection itself. If it's a connection with affection, then this helps even more. It not only helps you relax, but it helps to make connections, and remembering becomes easier. They've been experimenting with this in Alzheimer's, and they found that just the connection of holding a pet or of spending more time with someone that they can remember helps to open up memory again. It helps it, whether it's emotional, whether it's relaxation, whether it's something more mysterious having to do with love or what. It does help memory come back. It helps to maintain memory, some kind of connection. Typically, the authorities, let's put it that way, will say that a live connection is what you need, like a real animal that you're holding, a real person that you're hugging, or good conversation with somebody face to face. And yes, of course, that's nice. And yes, of course, it makes a bigger impression. But I beg to differ in saying that the rest of it is no good. Because we can have feelings of connection, affection, laughter, enjoyment on Facebook, watching YouTube videos, and really getting so much out of those. And there's a virtual world where I did this talk this morning. It's called Second Life. People from all around the world come with a little character they've created, but they come to this place where we have a beautiful amphitheater on a tropical island, and I give this talk. And we have the most enjoyable time. And we feel connected. They come from all kinds of different countries, and we feel connected. So the connection is important, not the medium so much. Although, like I said, if there's affection and physical contact, that's going to strengthen it, no doubt about it. But even texting can be good. They say the kids aren't connecting. Yes, they are, but not in the approved way. Right? And it's funny, I found in Second Life, people prefer to text rather than use voice. And I found out why. Texting gives you time to think. It gives you time to think and absorb what you're texting, what the conversation is about. And that makes it even deeper. So it's very something to think about at any rate. But this is another way, this idea of connection. Now another one for memory. Learn a skill. Developing a skill, of course it requires memory, but it creates all of these brain connections and memory connections and helps to strengthen what you already know. Actually, I suppose you could call cribbage a new skill, but learning a new language doesn't have to be that. Learning how to crochet or knit, learning how to play the ukulele, learning how to do some kind of skill. And the beauty of this, makes it work so well, is that it involves the body. And so the learning involves the body very strongly, and that's what makes memory stronger. It makes it easier to remember more things and creates more connections. And finally, just a few to finish up with, there are lots and lots of memory tricks. Susan told you a few tricks that we used in chanting to help enhance memory. So I'll give you a few. There's lots of them, but I'll give you a few. One of them I call weird associations. Now I said something like this when I was talking about remembering somebody's name. A long time ago, when I used to do a lot of travel and do a lot of workshops with a lot of people, I wouldn't make it too many people. I would say around 30 or 40 people if I would have in a workshop. Why, I would make it a point at the end of the workshop, we're all gathered in a big circle, I would name and thank every person in the circle. Right? Oh boy, was that impressive. The way I did it was, as soon as I met them, I would create an image to go with them. And then during the workshop, I'd reinforce this image. Now, when we finished the workshop, they were not going to stand in a row. So sometimes you can create a story to go with things to help remember them. But if they're all going to be standing in different places, that doesn't work so well. So you got to have something particular to them. And the more outrageous, the easier it is to remember. Okay? So the things that if you want to remember names or any kind of set of objects or things, remembering, make an outrageous kind of imagination association was really helpful for that. Another way to do it is to remember, this takes practice. Sherlock Holmes was really good at this. You remember patterns. Now, if you remember patterns or you become aware of patterns, there's two things that you know. You can recall the pattern and put it in a new situation. That's what the master chess players do. The reason they can play so many games is not because they're recalling all the details of the game, they're remembering the patterns. They've got those patterns down pat. And they can look at it instantly and see the pattern and know the pattern that you go to from there to change it. So that makes it far, far easier than trying to remember who made which move and what are all the pieces and all that kind of stuff. You get a quick memory of the entire pattern. Okay? So this is learning how to pick out pattern, to remember patterns, to notice patterns. And you can then, if you know patterns, you can also know when a pattern, there's something different about it. Okay? And that can help you in many situations. Sort of memories involved in this, but just one time I had practiced patterns a lot, and we were in Tahiti and walking along a trail, and a friend had fell off the trail into the jungle and lost his glasses. And we didn't know about it. We were all ahead. And he came up and told me. I said, okay. I came back. He showed me where he fell off the trail. It's just jungle. So I sat, very present moment awareness, felt the pattern of the jungle, and picked up his glasses because they didn't belong there. Okay? It's the kind of thing that you can do, but you have to be familiar with patterns. And so that is a memory thing. And let's see, did I have one of the others here to do? Oh, well, just one more thing. If you'd like to experiment. I, quite a few years ago, took a weekend course in how to read 20,000 words a minute. I had to learn this. What was this about? So it was really interesting. They did a lot of very strange stuff in that course, including some ordinary stuff like going down into alpha state, but some very strange stuff. And one time, nobody learned 20,000 words a minute. Okay? But one girl, 12-year-old girl, and I, we did score 12,000. But that's with focus. But one of the techniques I found very useful, because I did this technique with them and I didn't think I had remembered anything. And then they gave a test and I got almost everything right, because the answers came as I saw the question. And consciously, I didn't even know I had remembered this. The technique is strange, but you might practice it if you want to. You take a book and I suppose you could figure out other ways, but it works really well with a book. And you pay close attention, hold the book in your hand, really feel it, really be there, and then ripple the pages as fast as you can. Now, if you do this about 3 times at least, and then once in a while come back and do it again, you're going to start remembering stuff from that book. I'm using it with the Hawaiian dictionary right now. And you're going to start remembering things from that book that can be useful to you and that are going to help you trust your memory. And that is a big factor also in helping to maintain and improve it. So there you go. Pau ka'olelo. The tale is told. Okay.